Good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
Excellent. My name is Rodney, and I'm the principal of Peekskill High School. Welcome. So Peekskill High School, we have a motto, which is Peekskill High School building bridges of excellence for every student every day. And we strive and try to live by that. So I want to welcome everyone. You are in a warm home among friends. We want to be able to start the evening off right. I want to give special thanks to the NAACP for continuing to partner with the school district, Peekskill High School in particular. This event is brought to you by the NAACP along with the Peekskill High School Black Culture Club. So we want to thank you for being here. Just going to give a couple of remarks, try to be as brief as possible so we can get the show on. As the high school principal, I'm in my second year, and we have grown as a school in terms of population. About 5 years ago, we had about 700 students, and now we're up to 1,100. And in every high school, as you probably have seen what's going on in their show, unfortunately, there are challenges. And the only way we can move our youngsters is by partnering with community agencies, partnering with parents, and by working together, we can really create bridges for our young people so they can move forward and be able to create bridges for others. So again, thank you for being here. I'm going to leave you with one of my favorite quotes by Nelson Mandela. Education is the greatest weapon which one can use to change the world. So without any further ado, I'm going to welcome up my brother-in-arms, Mr. Martin McDonald, President of the NAACP. Thank you and good evening.
Good evening, good evening.
Good evening.
Thank you for being here. I want to thank Principal Arthur, thank the Peekskill City School District with Interim Superintendent Mary Foster is out there in the audience. Thank you for partnering with us and giving us the opportunity to come here and have this program. Thanks to the Black Culture Club for partnering with us as well and hosting tonight's event. Just want to say a couple of words real quick as we thank our panelists that are here. Sam will introduce them later, but the mission of the NAACP is to ensure the political, educational, social, and economic equality of rights for all persons and to eliminate race-based discrimination and racial hatred. That's what we do. I want to thank Dr. Hazel-Ann Dukes, our state conference president, for supporting the efforts that we're doing in her leadership. We have here in the audience with us Mr. Wilbur Aldridge, who is our regional director. Mr. Aldridge, wave your hand right there. A round of applause. And I really, really want to thank also the NAACP branches that are represented here tonight. I'm going to miss somebody, but I'm going to try. Matter of fact, if you can just stand if you can, the NAACP branches that are here, the presidents and their members. Thank you very much. Excellent. All right, so in the middle here we have Dr. David Eberly. He's from Southern Dutchess. And then to my right, your left, we have Willie Trotman. He is from Spring Valley. To his left, we have Francis Pratt from NAACP. And behind Mr. Trotman, we have Tom Kistner from Portchester. To his left, we have Lena Anderson. And way over here to my right, your left, is a gentleman I just met at our quarterly meeting about 2 weeks ago, Sven. That's right. Sven is from Northern Dutchess. So thank you all for being here. Appreciate that. Are there any elected officials in the audience that I need to acknowledge? I've been running around. I was trying to keep a list. Any of our elected officials here? Anybody holding an office that was voted in?
Hi, I'm Sinead Williams, Councilman for the 1st District in Yonkers, and I'm also here from the Yonkers NAACP.
Thank you, Sinead. Thank you for being here. Wow, well, I was hoping that there were more elected officials here, but thank you, Sinead, for being here. We appreciate you taking the time to join us tonight. This is not a feel-good topic. This is one of those courageous conversations that many would rather avoid and not have to deal with in public like this. So maybe some of the officials feel like maybe it's not the place to be right now. One of the things that we do best in the NAACP is we get people out to vote. Not for who, but for what. President Dukes reminds us that we have no permanent friends or permanent enemies, only permanent interest in fighting for justice and equality. We tell people to get out and vote for justice and equality. Our number one priority in 2018 is going to be getting people out to vote. This is a midterm election. That's pretty important to me, and it's pretty important to us in the NAACP. We have a commander-in-chief who is biased and prejudiced toward people of color. It's pretty clear from his comments about good people on both sides down in Charlottesville, Virginia, and the S-hole countries. He's clearly telling us who he is and what he believes. You have to believe what people tell you sometimes. That's reason enough to vote. And then we look at his top cop, Attorney General Sessions, who has declared Black Lives Matter as an extremist group, but has little to say about the mass killings in Las Vegas. And makes me wonder, how far is the NAACP away from being labeled a black extremist group in his eyes? Seems to me that 45 did not really drain the swamp, but instead he filled it with a bunch of bags of dirt. Sorry about that. But anyway, I digress. Tonight, we, the Peekskill NAACP, continue in our belief to be proactive and not just reactive. We have been given instructions to agitate, educate, mobilize, and organize. We, along with the New York State Conference of NAACP branches, fully support a commission on prosecutorial conduct, and we'll be asking our elected officials to pass the pending legislation in Albany now. Thank you. This is what democracy looks like. And change is in your ability to take action. If we don't take action, nothing will change. The system has to change. The system is the enemy. Dr. King said it best in his book, Why We Can't Wait, back in 1963. He wrote that the enemy of the Negro, the enemy that the Negro faced became not the individual who had oppressed him, but the evil system which permitted that individual to do so. We must change the system. The system is the enemy, here, today, and now. Not people, but the system. So again, I thank you for being here. Thanks again to our distinguished panelists and guests. And right now, I'm going to turn it over to the person behind all this, Mr. Sam North, our Criminal Justice Chair and second Vice President of the Peekskill branch of the NAACP. Give him a round of applause as he comes forward, please.
Good evening. Good evening. First of all, I just have to say I'm very proud to be part of an organization with a president who's as committed and passionate and in particular focused on action. And so I want to say thank you to President Martin McDonald of the Peekskill NAACP. As from the beginning, this has been a branch that has been This has been a branch that's been incredibly active across all of the various game changers that we seek to commit ourselves to, making change in education, in healthcare, in criminal justice, in environmental justice, and civic engagement, of course, which is ultimately the most important in this year, 2018, as we approach the elections in November. As Martin said, my name is Sam North. I have the privilege of serving as the second Vice President and Criminal Justice Chair of the Peekskill NAACP. I'd also like to thank Interim Superintendent Dr. Mary Foster and Principal Arthur, as well as the staff of the Peekskill High School, all of the people that helped put this together, who stayed around, and some of them are right here behind us here, the custodial staff, you name it, everybody working together made this possible. And they welcomed us into their home and made us feel like it was our home, and so we really appreciate that. And just a round of applause for everybody here at Peekskill High School. We also want to thank the Peekskill Black Culture Club for co-sponsoring tonight's program. They're selling some snacks and whatnot outside. I hope you were able to get some of those. We'd love to help them raise a little money for their club. And of course, a special thanks to my fellow NAACP Peekskill members for their hard work and support in making this tonight a reality. I'm going to be acting as, acting might be the key word, acting as the moderator for the evening. I hope not to have to say very much because we have a very esteemed group of panelists up here. I want to thank them, of course. We're extraordinarily grateful for our panelists for agreeing to be here tonight to share their important insights and experiences regarding the issue of prosecutorial misconduct. In the interest of time, I will just identify them as by name. Hopefully you got a program when you came in. There is biographical information about each of the panelists on the back. However, we had a last-minute substitution. Dr. Leroy Gadsden, who is the state NAACP chair and also the president of the Jamaica Queens branch, was scheduled to be on the panel, but he fell ill and is unable to be here. So we have a wonderful stand-in, if I may say so, Mayo Bartlet, right here to my left. Next in line is Kenneth Chamberlain, Jr. And then we have Jeffrey Deskovic. That feels like it's far away over there. Bill Bastuk. And Professor Bennett Gershman. So just a little bit on how we're going to do things. You'll briefly hear from each of the panelists, and then we'll have a Q&A session. So the first thing I'd like to ask you to do is to silence your cell phones. And while you have your cell phone out, we're going to try a little modern age technology stuff here. You'll notice at the bottom of your program, if you have it, and Principal Arthur, could you do me one favor and just hit the space bar on that computer there? I think the space bar will do it. There you go. So, okay, thank you. If you go to, on your phone, if you go to that website, www.slido.com, it will ask you, there'll be an opportunity to enter that code E221. And then you'll actually be able to ask questions from your phone. So if the speakers are up here speaking and you think of a question and you don't have a pencil to write it down, you can just ask a question directly on your phone. It's going to pop up on the computer screen that I have in front of me. And so I'll be monitoring that, taking a look at the questions, and I'll be able to ask as many of the audience questions as possible that way. If you prefer the old-fashioned method, we do have a microphone that's right up here up front. But again, while the speakers are speaking, if you think of something you want to send up a question my way, I'll be taking a look at those, and hopefully we'll be able to answer as many questions as possible. All right. Without further ado, oh, one more thing, I'm sorry. Bill Bastuk has made up a really useful fact sheet about the proposed Commission for Prosecutorial Misconduct. And he gave them to me a minute ago, and I made sure that they were out on that table that you passed on your way in. If you would like a copy of this fact sheet, you can pick one up on the way out. It's got a lot of really useful information about what the panel would do, etc. So that's there if you need it. Okay, let's get the program started. We'll begin with Professor Bennett Gershman.
Thank you.
Do you want to come up here?
No.
Nope, you stay right there?
Is that okay if I do? I'm tired, I don't want to walk there.
That's fine.
Thank you to the NAACP Peekskill branch and to Sam North for organizing this important program, and to all the distinguished panelists that I feel honored to be part of. I was a prosecutor for many years. I think I pretty well did the right thing I think all the time. But I've been following prosecutors for most of my professional career. I've written about them. I've consulted in cases. So I think I have a fairly good take on what it is that prosecutors do and why they do it. You know, we had a program in my law school a few years ago where several students who I taught became prosecutors and came back to the school for program where they were going to tell future, you know, students who might want to be prosecutors about their work. And these new prosecutors, every one of them, there was one thing that stood out when they were describing their work. One thing, I didn't realize how much power I had. I didn't realize how much power I had. Robert Jackson, the great justice of the Supreme Court, said that nobody in America, nobody has more control over the life, the liberty, and the reputation of people than the prosecutor. You know, when you I want to try a thought experiment. You know, when you talk about what it is that criminal law is involved with, you know, you make a reference to the criminal justice system. The criminal justice system. You know, that's very, very neutral and very antiseptic, and it sounds like a nice phrase. You know, what do you see? What do you imagine when you think of the criminal justice system? You know, you might think of a police station and cops. You might think of police shootings. You might think of the courtroom. You might think of the judge and the defense lawyer and all those things that happen. You know, the criminal justice system is a name that we give to a system that really, in my opinion, is a prosecutor system. It's a prosecutorial system because prosecutors run the show. Prosecutors do everything there is to do in that system, in that process. The prosecutor decides who's going to be charged with a crime and what crime, whether that person's going to get a chance to plead guilty or maybe give that person a chance to be a cooperating witness. The prosecutor makes decisions on bail. The prosecutor makes decisions on what information to give to the defense. The prosecutor makes decisions on whether he's going to go to trial or not, whether she's going to go to trial or not. The prosecutor controls the proof. And really, the prosecutor controls the punishment. Now, you may say, oh, no, the judge does. No, the prosecutor does. Take my word for it. Many sentences are mandatory, and the prosecutor decides what those mandatory sentences are going to be when the prosecutor brings the charges. And judges, so there are a few courageous judges who might want to challenge a prosecutor. Most of the time, the judges knuckle under when the prosecutor says, this is what I want to do. This is the way I want this case to go. And the defense attorney, and you know, there's a great defense attorney sitting here, Mayo Bartlet, but he might tell you that, you know, he can fight as hard as he wants to, but the prosecutor is going to, in the end, is going to determine the result of the case. You know, I was very uneasy coming here tonight, to tell you the truth. Why was I uneasy? Well, because I knew that Peekskill High School was something that was significant to me. It was significant to me because one of my, I call him student, I guess, but he's a friend, he's a colleague, he's somebody who I mean, I don't know how many words I can use to describe how I feel about Jeffrey Deskovic. He was here when he was grabbed out of his life and thrust into this prosecutorial system, and Jeff will tell it. I can't even find the words to tell it, but he will. And Bill Bastick will tell you about the work, the incredible work he's been doing to try to make people understand that. Most prosecutors, I think, most prosecutors try to do the right thing. That's my opinion. I worked with loads of prosecutors, and I know so many of them who were, who are. But there are a lot of prosecutors who don't do the right thing, who cheat, who violate the rules. And the problem is, really, the problem is there is no accountability. Now, that's not just me saying it. I think if you spoke to virtually every observer, academic, judge, in America who knows about the consequences of prosecutorial misconduct, they tell you that in virtually all cases, there are no sanctions, there's no accountability for very, very serious wrongdoing. And it really has to change, I think. I think there has to be some process, some system that can make prosecutors accountable in the same way that judges are accountable. Every state has a commission to investigate judges. Judges don't violate the rules nearly as often as prosecutors do. Some judges do. Some judges have been punished. In fact, in New York, after they created this Judicial Conduct Commission, a significant number of judges were sanctioned. Before that, virtually no judges were sanctioned. And the same thing would happen with prosecutors. And you know what I think? I think prosecutors, good prosecutors, and there are a lot of good prosecutors, really want this commission to be established. I mean, I work in an institution where if I have people on my staff, colleagues who cheat, who violate the rules, who are lazy, who are incompetent, and who do the wrong thing, I'd want those people removed. So I think that the time has come. You all know it, I think. And so this is a good place to have this discussion, I think, for purposes of education and for purposes of all of us actively pushing our lawmakers to do the right thing and to get this legislation onto the floor of our legislature, where, in my opinion, if it gets onto the floor, it's going to win. So that's all I want to say for now. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Gershman. And that's why we're here today, just really quickly. The end game here is to get this legislation passed and signed into law, right? The Commission on Judicial Conduct has been around for 40 years, and we still have no accountability for prosecutors. We are on the verge, really. We just need to put that kind of pressure that the only thing that lawmakers ultimately listen to is the kind of pressure that we can put on them if we make this a sustained effort, and that's the plan. So speaking of making it a sustained effort, let's hear now from Bill Bastek.
Thank you to the Peekskill NAACP for putting this together. This is a very important event, and everyone in this room is a very powerful voice for change. I got involved in this movement because after about 30 years in public life, a 16-year-old girl decided she was going to make up a story and accuse me of raping her in a shed at the Rochester Yacht Club in Rochester, New York. And I'm not going to get into the details of that, but it took me a year to go to trial. And it took me a year to go to trial because the prosecutor involved was going to do everything in her power to put me away for the next 25 years so that she could have a gold star on her head and a golden hammer on her door for putting away a high-profile, wrongfully accused person. But the reason it took me a year to get to trial was because this prosecutor was withholding evidence that I was legally entitled to under the law. Diary entries in which she predicted the date and time that I was going to rape her, psychiatric records that the prosecutor claimed never existed. Fortunately, I had a good lawyer who was not going to go to trial and who fought like hell to get what we needed. That doesn't always happen. What happened to me, though, happens quite often. And shortly after my acquittal, I learned that prosecutors rule Albany. They determine what criminal justice legislation passes. They determine the tone of that criminal justice legislation. They try to make sure there's loopholes in every criminal justice reform that takes place. And I'll be able to answer some of the more technical details on the commission later, but Bennett hit it right on the button. Prosecutors are the most powerful people in the criminal justice system, and they are the least accountable people. Every profession, from bankers to to doctors. If a patient dies on an operating table, there's a procedure in place to look at what happened. Why did that person die? When someone is wrongfully prosecuted or wrongfully convicted like Jeff did, the conviction is overturned. The victim, in this case Jeff, receives a well-deserved compensation, but life goes on for those prosecutors. Life goes on for those DAs. We have no system to really look at what went wrong, as we do in other professions. Hairdressers, cooks, every profession. You're a hairdresser, okay, can have their license removed if they don't keep their scissors clean. Now, I want to give you an example of how powerful prosecutors are. Today, I was on a statewide criminal justice reform network call. It was to focus on bail reform and on speedy trial and on discovery. 3 issues that the governor mentioned in his State of the State, but he left out the commission, the most important piece. And in this discussion of bail reform, speedy trial, and discovery, we were looking at what was wrong with those bills. And every time in this hour-and-a-half discussion, what came up was loopholes for the prosecutor. How the prosecutor could twist this and twist that. How that bill could be made tighter so the prosecutor couldn't work their way around something. This is how powerful the prosecutors are. This is why this commission is so important. Because regardless of what we do in the world of criminal justice reform, unless there is a mechanism in place to hold prosecutors accountable and face consequences when they break their own rules. Keep in mind, prosecutors, their job is to create consequences for those of you who break laws. When they break their own rules, there are no consequences. That's not common sense. It makes no sense. Now, we have a lot of incremental reforms taking place. Bail, discovery, raise the age. However, these are minor policy defects. If we're going to change the culture and the institution of criminal justice, we have to start where the rubber meets the road. The fact that the DAs, this bill to establish the Commission on Prosecutorial Conduct is the DA's worst nightmare. They are doing everything possible to kill this bill. They are lying, as Bennett says. They're claiming there are systems in place. They're claiming there are grievance committees that have never investigated a bad prosecutor. We don't even know how many complaints they get because they don't keep track. We foiled them. We foiled this grievance system that they claim exists. And I think it's important for you to know about these myths. Because 3 years ago, when the commission bill hit the Senate Finance Committee, once the Senate Finance Committee is a pretty powerful committee. It's the second most powerful committee in the state Senate, probably the 4th most powerful committee in Albany. This hit on a Monday in June. Senator DeFrancisco intentionally kept that off the Senate Finance calendar until the Friday before the bill was supposed to come up, to try and catch the prosecutors off guard. Well, lo and behold, their lobbyists caught the bill. I was in Dunkin' Donuts that Monday morning in the Capitol, and a certain counsel who behind the scenes is working with us came up to me and said, "Be careful, Bill, what you say, because the prosecutors are all over the place. They're here to kill this bill." They didn't want it to move out of Senate Finance because the next step is rules. Then the next step is the floor. That afternoon, after it moved out of Senate Finance, they met with key Senate leadership and Assembly leadership. And they threatened them. And the senators said, well, and they used these grievance committees. And the senators said, Senator DeFrancisco and Assemblyman Lentil on the other side, said, well, if these grievance committees are working, can you give us some examples? And the DAs said, yes, Senator, we'll give you some examples. And please, please, please don't move this bill. Well, Senator said, when are you going to come back with these examples? He said, oh, we'll come right back in the next couple of weeks before the end of session. To this day, after a letter was sent by the President of the Senate, Flanagan, and Senator DeFrancisco, to this day, not one case has been submitted by the DA's Association. So they lied. And now their new argument, by the way, just so you know, is that the commission is going to have a chilling impact on the criminal justice system. Their newest argument, and they'll come up with a new argument this session as well, is that the commission will be used by defense attorneys and their clients to interfere with investigations, with murders and with rapes, and slow down these prosecutions. So what the senator did, with Bennett's assistant, who helped draft up this language, we amended the bill for about the fourth time. And we put in a clause on page 3 of that bill that says that at the request of the prosecuting agency, the commission can set aside a case that's being investigated, if a case that was ever occurring. By the way, that never occurred with the Commission on Judicial Conduct. That has never happened. So it's going to be interesting to see what their next neurotic argument is. But be rest assured that they will descend upon Albany as this bill moves through session once again and try and prevent it, as they have successfully done in the past, from being voted on the Senate floor and on the Assembly floor because of their behind-the-scenes tactics. By the way, in 2016, the other thing that they pulled was they went to the Queens delegation. There were Queens Assembly people who were on the bill as co-sponsors, and I'm going to end in 1 minute. The day that that bill was supposed to show up on the Assembly floor, the Queens Assembly members disappeared. They actually went home sick. They told the speaker they could not be there. We called it the DA flu. Because some people from the Queens Assembly's office, staff people, by the way, called relatives who are Assembly people and said, my boss does not want you to vote on this. That's the corrupt culture of DAs.
To mention that Bill Basta came all the way down from Rochester today just to be here. So I think that in alone deserves another round of applause. I'm going to turn it over now to Mayo Bartlet because he is unable to stay for the entire program, and I want to get to him so that he's able to get to where he needs to be after this. But thank you again for filling in on very short notice, and we really appreciate your being here. So, Mayo Bartlet.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate you having me, and as always, Ben, it's a pleasure listening to you, and you always have a great perspective. As well, Bill, your perspective is unbelievable, invaluable, and I just thank you for taking the time to come here from Rochester to share your experience. One of the things that we found over the years with the Westchester Coalition for Police Reform is that there's a dynamic that runs in the United States, and it's an us versus them dynamic. So you are much more likely to see the victim if the victim is African American, much less so if the victim is Caucasian. You're much less likely to hear Bill's story or Jeff Deskovich's story because then it doesn't play into the narrative of black versus white. I do, however, have to take exception with the suggestion that the prosecutor is the most powerful person in the criminal justice system. And I think that the most powerful person in the criminal justice system is your police officer. Because without the police officer, you don't meet the prosecutor. Without the police officer, you don't get charged. Prosecutors do not go to your house and grab you and drag you out of your home, or in the case of Mr. Chamberlain, tell you that if you don't open the door on a medical call that they're going to shoot you. So if the police determine not only whether you get arrested, but they determine whether you live. Now, we're not here to talk about that today. We're here to talk about prosecutorial misconduct. And I come to this conversation as a former prosecutor. Spent 11 years in the Westchester County DA's office. And I didn't think I was going to spend that much time in the DA's office. I thought I'd be there for maybe 3 years. I didn't put in for the parking pass. I figured that I'm not going to be here long enough to get that. And then, of course, it was a tremendous mistake. I stayed very long and wished I had the parking spot. But I can tell you that I always thought that my colleagues proceeded the way I did. So in my mind, I didn't care if you were pro se, which meant if you were by yourself going against me, or if you had the dream team, it didn't matter to me. What mattered to me was, number one, did you do what we think you did? And number two, what's an appropriate remedy? Because just because you may be guilty doesn't mean that you need to go to jail or that you need to have a permanent mark on your record. Unfortunately, I learned that not everybody looked at that job the way I did. I thought it was one of the greatest jobs you could ever have. If your only job was to seek justice. And in the course of my career, I dismissed on my motion well over a dozen cases. Also, as a prosecutor, there's the ability for the prosecutor to use your prior bad acts, prior convictions against you at trial. Molyneux evidence, we call it Ventimiglia Sandoval evidence. I didn't do that. I didn't do that because I always thought that if I can't prove the case based on what the evidence is against you in this case, I shouldn't be allowed to go back and pull up the fact that, you know, he had a fight 8 years ago, but this is a petty larceny. What's that have to do with the other? Nothing. And that we don't get the same opportunity to look into your accuser's background quite often, certainly not law enforcement background, because you're not going to know that your police officer committed a felony and wasn't charged. So those are some of the things that concern me. But focusing on prosecutorial misconduct, in 14 years as a criminal defense attorney practicing New York State, Connecticut, New York City, throughout New York City in the Hudson Valley, and in federal court, I have never had a judge make a determination that the prosecution has ever engaged in misconduct. Ever. And I'm not a guy that walks up there and lightly, just throws out there, oh, it's prosecutorial misconduct. I want to make sure that that's what it is before I say that. And I'll give you a couple of examples. We had a case where we had a guy that was visiting a friend in a housing authority, and the prosecutors, well, not the prosecutor, again, the police arrested him and his friend, said they were trespassing. Well, we learned that the guy worked at the housing authority and the friend lived in the housing authority, so it's a little hard to trespass at work when you're still employed and to trespass in your own building. So we went to the executive director of the housing authority, and we told him what happened, and he said, no, we didn't mean to have these guys arrested. They're not on any list. We're going to write a letter for the DA to drop the charges. We presented that information to the district attorney, and she determined that she was going to prosecute these people anyway. Now, I tried the case free of charge, pro bono. You can only do that so often. You can't live your life pro bono. I can't get anything pro bono. I can't say, hey, I'm hungry, let me go to McDonald's when I leave here pro bono. I'm going to be told by the police, hey, don't ever come back. Okay, maybe I'll be sent somewhere else where I get pro bono meals, But at the end of the day, it took us 2 years and a trial, a jury trial, where to their credit, the police acknowledged that they didn't understand what you needed to make an arrest. And when I asked, what does it take to make an arrest, the officer smiled, young guy who relies on our prosecutors to be his counsel. And he said, a badge and a gun. I said, well, you don't really need a badge and a gun, do you? And he says, oh, well, I said, what about a citizen's arrest? The guy says, oh, yeah, you can make a citizen's arrest. And I said, well, what do you need in order to do, certainly for a police officer, to make an arrest? And eventually he came to the determination, probable cause. You have to have a really good faith belief that the person committed a crime. And the other way you could do it is if you had a warrant. And in order to have a warrant, you needed probable cause. Now, to the officer's credit, I said, well, did you have probable cause? He looked at the floor and said no. Now, most officers could have made up probable cause, and most juries would believe whatever the officer says because we're enamored with the uniform and the title and the robe and what side of the table you're on, as opposed to the character of the person that's in that uniform or the character of the person testifying. So in that case, we got an acquittal. Literally, I don't think it took 2 minutes for them to come back not guilty, and it should have. But that guy could have lost his job. Luckily, he didn't, because the people who he was hired by are the ones that said he shouldn't have been charged. But if it was anybody else, how long are they going to allow you to come to miss a day from work to sit in court? How many times can you do that? So the collateral consequences of someone not taking the time to investigate a case and to make sure that they're charging the proper person are tremendous. And then we talk about tax cuts and why property taxes are so high and all of this. Well, you know, it costs us more money to incarcerate a person for a year than it does for us to send Jeffrey Descovich or Kenneth Chamberlain to college or law school. Okay, that's why you don't have your health care and your Medicare. And one of the reasons that our senators are so much against all of this is that they love to keep the jails full. They're very much against reducing the prison population, because when you go to Peekskill, if you took the 2 prisons away, you might not have a village or a town there. You might not have a mall there. So the industry they have, where like maybe down in West Virginia it's coal, their industry is people being incarcerated. So we have to look at it and understand the money trail, understand that dynamic. And the other example I'm going to give you is a federal case. And in that federal case, we had a guy who was charged with human trafficking for the purposes of sex, carried life sentence. He had a previous attorney who allowed him to sit down with the prosecution, with the FBI, ICE, and with a federal prosecutor with no protection, unprotected proffer, and spoke with them for 3 hours. I ended up getting involved in the case. I became his attorney with my colleague, Wali Muhammad, and we ended up going to trial on the case. But in the interim, we found out that there were 4 allegations, 4 particular dates, that this guy was supposedly engaged in conduct. We found out that on one of the dates, he was in the middle of a 2-week trip to Europe. It's a little difficult to sexually abuse somebody that's in Putnam County when you're in Europe, okay? The other one, the guy's in the hospital being treated for kidney stones. Equally a little difficult, unless the person said they had signed in to visit him and they were in the room with him. That's not the case. Third one, police were at the house by mistake. They were supposed to be across the street. Nobody said, save us. No one said, thank God you're here. And the last one, the young lady says, this man told me, my brother, and my mother to all take our clothes off so we could get to know each other better. We were fortunate enough to be able to speak to the brother, who was younger, and at the time I think he was maybe 10 years old, and he said, that never happened. That would have been crazy. I would never forget that. Now, I present that information to the United States Attorney. The United States Attorney told Judge Seibel down in Southern District that that those dates are wrong. And she says, well, are you saying that the detective pulled these dates out of thin air? He says, yes. Yes. Essentially that the arresting officer basically engaged in fiction with the dates, because the dates didn't fit the narrative. I asked her to direct him to speak to the detective. He says, it's not my witness. Now, when is the person who arrests you not the witness against you? But I called up. Yeah, it's me, it's Mayo Bartlet. I'm the defense attorney. I know you want to talk to me. We always conference with the arresting officers, right? They call us up out of the blue so that we can prepare for trial together. You know, that's not going to happen. But this guy did speak with me because I told him what that prosecutor had said. And he said, no, I didn't make those dates up. By the way, she circled each of those dates on a calendar. Now, I'm thinking, this is great. My guy's not looking at life in prison anymore. I think it should be an outright dismissal. He's going to go home. We're going to go celebrate. I called the U.S. Attorney up. He says, yeah, I knew all about the calendar. Now, that's a Brady violation. It's exculpatory, or at a minimum, potentially exculpatory information that he has an obligation to provide to me as soon as possible. And believe me, we're talking about the United States government here. As soon as possible means immediately. They have everybody's tax dollars and all the resources you could possibly ask for. I couldn't get the judge to make a determination that there was any misconduct in that case. Okay, we had to go to trial on that case, and after 6 weeks, and after testimony that this young lady met with the FBI and ICE and the prosecutors for more than 20 separate incidents to discuss something as simple as these facts, and also after the fact that we were able to establish that they had lived together for 2 years, he put braces on everyone's teeth, built a home for them in their native country, that he sent them to college, and pictures of them all looking like brother and sister and father and children in Disney World and also at the Grand Canyon. And I started to wonder if I could find somebody to kidnap my family, if that's going to be the case. Well, by the time we got finished with all of that, we got an acquittal. And it was nice we had an acquittal. It's great I see my clients. Great we go to dinner. But you know what he doesn't get back? He doesn't get back those 3 years he sat in prison. So when you start talking about accountability, hey, as a defense attorney, believe me, I'm accountable. If I suborn perjury and I put someone up to testify and I know it's false, trust me, I won't be a lawyer very long. There's no lobby for the defense attorney. There's no lobby for any of the rest of us. And I would like to think, and you know, listen, Mike Borrelia is here right now from the district attorney's office. He's here. And Mike, thanks for being here. I appreciate the fact that you came here. I've known Mike Borrelia for a long, long time. And if someone was going to tell me that he engaged in that conduct, it would shock me. I would truly be in disbelief. That's how all of our prosecutors ought to be. It's not to say you're perfect. I understand that in 25 years, I'm quite sure that I prosecuted somebody who was innocent. Not knowingly. I'm quite sure that some people who were guilty weren't convicted. Okay? But at the end of the day, if I knowingly go in there and violate my oath, number one, how on earth can I expect anybody to have trust in the criminal justice system? And if people don't trust the criminal justice system, then what do we have? So there has to be a level of accountability that's at least equal to the accountability that they ask of everybody else. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bartlett. Now we're going to turn it over to Kenneth Chamberlain, Jr. Let's give him a round of applause.
Good evening, everyone, and I'm definitely truly honored to be here sitting on this panel, especially seeing that in terms of the legal aspect of things, I'm a novice up here, but I can definitely speak from what my family and I have experienced with the justice system surrounding the killing of my father, Kenneth Chamberlain Sr. This happened in November 19th, 2011. My father inadvertently triggered his life aid pendant that he wore around his neck. My father suffered from a heart condition and chronic obstructive pulmonary disease and a few other medical problems. When they attempted to reach him, the monitoring station, they were unsuccessful. So they contacted the White Plains Police Department. White Plains Police are first responders. They arrived at my father's apartment in White Plains. They knocked on the door. My father came to the door and said, "I'm fine, I didn't call you. I'm okay." He closed the door back. The police insisted that they come in my father's home. There were no exigent circumstances. They didn't have a warrant, and they didn't have his consent. So it should have been left right there. For over 93 minutes, they would bang on my father's door, they would yell at him, they would scream at him, they would mock his military service, they would taunt him. Now, when I say that, a lot of times people will say, did this really happen? Go to YouTube and type in Kenneth Chamberlain Sr. audio, and I've said this time and time again, I challenge anyone to tell me you don't hear misconduct or murder. To make a long story short, at one point my father says, I'm okay, I didn't call you. You hear a police officer yell, excuse my language, I don't give a fuck, nigga, open the door. They eventually take the door off its hinges, fire an electronic taser at him, beanbag shotgun 4 times, and they shoot him and kill him, alleging that he posed an imminent threat to life or well-being, and that they had no choice but to use lethal force. From the very beginning of this, you know, when we talk about prosecutorial misconduct or even judicial misconduct, I can't sit here on this panel and say to you that that definitely happened, but I definitely question the manner in which my father's case was investigated. When you look at the very beginning, from the police department, without even conducting an investigation, saying the shooting was justified, and the story was a hatchet-wielding, police shoot and kill a hatchet-wielding man. And then it was, he had a knife, he had a hatchet, he had both. The story wasn't accurate from the beginning. I maintained even at that time that I wasn't laying blame on the police department. And I said that if my father did anything to cause these officers to have to use deadly physical force, I would turn and walk away. That I would just worry about keeping my family together and doing the things to keep us strong. The DA, the Westchester County DA at that time, Janet D. Fiore, promised a full and fair investigation into the killing of my father. But interestingly enough, at the same time that she said that, I received a call from the family of Damroy DJ Henry, a football player for Pace University that was killed by police officers. And she gave her condolences to my family, and then the second thing she said to me was, do not trust the Westchester County DA. She's going to lie to you. Now, we know that the grand jury proceedings are secret proceedings, so I don't know what was presented to the grand jury. But when you listen to the audio and you hear everything that took place, it surprised me that they did not come back with any type of indictment, not one. Not criminally negligent homicide, no reckless endangerment. And even when you had people that were there saying that the police, it wasn't a crime until the police made it one. So now, again, when you look at this situation, in May of 2012, they came back with no true bill, no indictment. A reporter asked the Westchester County DA, what about the racial slur that was hurled at Mr. Chamberlain before he was shot and killed? The Westchester County District Attorney said, yes, it was used, and we do not condone that, but it was used as a tactic to distract Mr. Chamberlain. So again, as I said, I can't say that that's prosecutorial misconduct, but as a family member of a victim, I have to sit back and wonder, you know, what did you present? And as much as I tried to fight that situation, I was blocked at every turn. And now that same DA sits on the highest court in New York State. She's now on the New York State Court of Appeals. She's the chief judge. To me, that's a problem. But now, so of course I support this bill any way that I can, and will stand with Jeff and everyone else in this fight to try to get this pushed. Because what my family experienced, and like I said, although I cannot prove it, it teeters there. It's borderline. And it's the relationship between the police and the DA's office, and then it's the relationship with the DA's office and the judges, and they're all working together, and they will shut your case down. Because even when we moved from the county level and we went into civil proceedings, we experienced the same thing. There were rulings that were made and that would make me question what is being presented. A full and fair, if you're going to put me on trial, put all of the evidence out there. Don't say, well, we'll allow this, but we'll disallow that. Oh, this can be put in, but that can't be put in. Or we'll allow the audio of Mr. Chamberlain cursing at the police officers, but we will not allow the audio of the police officers calling Mr. Chamberlain a nigger. It's only a word. This is what I was told. So, again, I definitely support this bill. I would definitely encourage, I always say leadership. In most of our cities, we see that the leadership has failed, so it is on you to step up and do the work that you want your leaders to do, because they will follow you if they see you doing it. And, I mean, other than that, like I said, thank you for having me, and I definitely support this bill for prosecutorial misconduct.
I just got to say that every time I read about the case of your father, I get angry and I get chills, and I can't even begin to express how it makes me feel. But to hear you sitting next to me talking about this and knowing what your family has been through, I can't say enough about the bravery, the courage, the compassion, and the dedication to your family that you have shown. And I really just appreciate you being here, and I want to say thank you.
Thank you.
And now we will turn to Jeffrey Deskovic.
So before I begin, I just want to recognize Mayor Andre Rainey is here. He's joined us, so I want to thank him for showing interest in criminal justice, for coming. So I was a student here in Peekskill High School in 1990. I was arrested and ultimately wrongfully convicted of the murder and rape of a Peekskill High School classmate. Just geographical-wise, if you're familiar with Fremont Avenue, right on the side, I was initially intercepted there by the police. I was 16 years old. Prosecutorial misconduct was a factor in my wrongful conviction. I'll share with you that I was convicted despite a pretrial negative DNA test result, and I ultimately spent 16 years in prison prior to being exonerated through further DNA testing, which not only reaffirmed my innocence, but also identified the actual perpetrator. That was 10 years ago. So you want to know if it can happen here? Yes, it happened to me. I lived in Crossroads, right on Brown Street, right across the street here. Prosecutorial misconduct was a major factor in my wrongful conviction. Let me get into that real quick. So firstly, a day before officially receiving the results from the DNA test from the FBI lab, the prosecutor rushed to the grand jury to indict me so as not to have to present that evidence. When the DNA didn't match me, the prosecutor got the medical examiner, former Westchester County medical examiner, Dr. Lewis Rowe. The medical examiner did his autopsy relatively quickly after the body of the victim was found. And 6 months later, after the DNA didn't match me, he suddenly, for the first time, claimed that he found medical evidence to show that the victim had been sexually active, which is what opened the door for the prosecutor to argue that it didn't matter that the DNA didn't match me, that the victim was basically sleeping around, and that was the explanation for the seminal fluid being present but yet not matching me. That was all a lie. In order to wrongfully convict me, the prosecutor was willing to trash the reputation of the victim. Taking his lie a step, and by the way, the prosecutor knew, okay, that this new finding happened 6 months later. So hundreds of autopsies later, he claimed to remember this finding that he never previously documented. Taking his lie a step further, the prosecutor named another youth, another student from the high school that he falsely claimed had had sex with the victim. But yet, he never set a proper evidentiary foundation. He never had a DNA test performed on that other student. He never even called him as a witness to give verbal testimony to that effect. He simply made the unsupported argument to the jury. As a result of that, I was wrongfully convicted. But the prosecutorial misconduct didn't end at the trial level. I sought further DNA testing, both through a letter to the DA and later on in federal proceedings. I suppose you might not technically call it misconduct, but in terms of seeking justice, it was contrary to the spirit of that. So I sought further DNA testing, and I was blocked twice. That was when Westchester District Attorney was Janine Pirro. The court clerk gave my lawyer the wrong information regarding the filing procedure. And as a result of that, when I was in federal court challenging my wrongful conviction, my petition arrived 4 days late, which the district attorney then jumped on that and urged the court to just rule that I was late without even looking at my issues, which included an argument that I was innocent based upon the DNA. Later, when I was exonerated and I filed civil suit, including against Westchester County, and they settled with me, we went to the then Westchester District Attorney, Janet DeFiore, and we expressed concern because my civil lawyers found 3 other cases that Dr. Rowe altered his findings in order to fit prosecution theory, all in tandem with that same prosecutor. And then we discovered that Dr. Rowe had been complained of in neighboring counties where he was moonlighting as a defense expert, where prosecutors and other law enforcement was complaining about him, because whichever way the money flowed is the way that he would testify. So he was helping people get away with crimes in neighboring counties, but that information was never turned over to the defense. So we went to then Westchester District Attorney Janet DeFiore, and we expressed concern about what about the other cases that Dr. Rowe testified on that in murder cases, but she wasn't willing to audit his cases. She wouldn't support our effort. We were trying to get the feds to come in and audit his cases, but she wouldn't support that initiative. Could it be that the medical examiner she continued to use as an expert for 1.5 years into her tenure? Maybe she didn't want to upset the convictions. But that's still an endeavor that hasn't been done to this day. No one has ever reviewed the other cases that he did. And to prove that he did in fact commit the misconduct, Westchester settled with me for $6.5 million, and he admitted that what he claimed he found on those slides in order to give that testimony against me did not actually exist. Let's talk about frequency. Well, the National Registry of Exonerations, which keeps track of all exonerations nationally, they're close to, if not at, 2,200 wrongful convictions across the country, both in DNA and non-DNA cases. In New York, we're third. We're third in the nation in wrongful convictions behind Texas and behind Illinois. A commonality in these wrongful conviction cases that threads through them, no matter what the cause of the wrongful conviction is, one of the commonalities that frequently is present is prosecutorial misconduct. And in terms of Peekskill itself, I'm not the only person who was exonerated from Peekskill, although that's not widely known. Charles Dabbs did 7 years from Peekskill on a rape that he did not commit, that DNA proved that he did not commit. Changing gears, let's talk about tactics, because it's one thing to share information, but I'm here for much more than that, as is everyone else. I'm here for action. I'm here for support. I'm here for solidarity. I need the people behind the bill. And for that, we need to share some move to action items. Well, first of all, one of our tactics in trying to get this bill passed is to make sure that the elected officials don't chicken out again at the end, as Bill Bassick referred to. So to that effect, everybody you could call, you could email, you could fax, the Westchester County elected officials. They receive me, they talk nice to me, but at the end of the day, they back off at the end. When we're at the moment of truth, when we're on the calendar now, we're waiting to get put on the calendar, or it's time to bring the bill up for a vote and we can never get that done, they back away, just like all the rest of them back away. But if they're convinced that you as their voters, as their constituents, want this bill, that you support this bill, and that that's going to have a lot to do with whether or not you vote for them again or not, if they're convinced that that's the equation, then maybe they'll stop being so afraid of the prosecutors and start being, afraid about whether they're going to get reelected or not, even though that's not supposed to be the theme. It's supposed to be do what's right because it's the right thing to do, regardless to what. But we already know that's not. Thank you. Let's hear it for that, okay? When's the last time a politician wants the office to do the right thing? Some exist. I don't think that that's a widespread thing. Now, another thing is this, is that we've been collecting resolutions from organizations. That's why I'm really so happy that the NAACP here in Peekskill is on fire for this issue. But we also been collecting resolutions from cities, towns, and counties. We need a resolution right here in Peekskill. We got the new slate. We got the new administration. We need a resolution in support of this. Postcards have worked before. The postcard campaign, sharing knowledge on the issue of prosecutorial misconduct. Again, the job of the prosecutor is not simply to win convictions, okay? It's to do justice. Now that means convicting guilty people through lawful means, using legally obtained evidence while not violating any rights. And it means dismissing cases when somebody is innocent, whether that's whether that's pre-conviction, during the trial, post-conviction, at any point. That's what it means. And so when the prevalence of prosecutorial misconduct, which takes place now where there's no deterrence, they're not afraid to engage in the misconduct. And listen to the type of misconduct that's regularly engaged in. Withholding evidence of innocence. They're supposed to turn that over. That's called Brady. That's called Rosario. Imagine defending yourself in a case and evidence of innocence that could be used to help the defense. That's withheld. Imagine where somebody is testifying and they got a benefit for their testimony. They got a financial reward. They got charges not brought against them, or they had their own case and they got a lesser sentence. But that information was never turned over to you or your attorney. But that's another common form of misconduct. If there's any parents out there in the audience, and I hope that there's quite a bit, imagine you're being threatened by the prosecutor that you're going to give the testimony that they want, or we're coming for your kids. You're going to lose custody of your kids. That's been threatened in New York, especially in Brooklyn, but prosecutorial misconduct is a problem statewide. Imagine the prosecutor gives an improper closing argument and that interferes with your fair trial rights. So therefore the reliability of the jury verdict, is not that accurate. So these are some of the common tactics, and just imagine that, they're not afraid to do it, right? The judges rarely call them out on it, and if they do happen to get caught, and it's not that easy to get caught, because if you hide and bury something, you hide and bury it, right? It's an aberration when it floats to the surface. But even if that happens, nothing's going to happen to you anyway. So what's the punishment? Where's the deterrence? My lawyers told me when I wanted them to file a complaint against my prosecutor, and I'm going to end with this, right? when I finished the civil suit, and I didn't let ne'er a person get away with who had anything to do with what happened to me and caused my 16 years, I went back to my civil rights lawyers, and I trusted them because they got me justice. And I said, you know, I want something to happen to my prosecutor. I couldn't bring the suit against him. That was dismissed because they have immunity, but let's at least file a complaint against them. My lawyer said to me, Jeff, it's a waste of time, it's a waste of money, nothing's going to happen. That's how serious this is. And we talk about how, this can happen to anyone. I want to just acknowledge the presence of another exoneree in the room who did 17 years. Mr. Rodney Roberts is here with us tonight. So can you just stand for just a brief second? Okay, this can happen. It does happen to anyone. And with that, I'm going to end. Thank you very much for listening to me.
Speaking of bravery and courage, to come before you tonight, Jeffrey Deskovic had to walk back into the school where he was taken from when he was 16 years old and put into prison for 16 years for a crime that he did not commit. And he had to live with that. I'm telling you right now, there are people in this town who still think he did it. So that stain of conviction, wrongful or not, stays with people. And in the face of that, you could fall down and not be able to pick yourself back up, but Jeffrey Deskovic took the money that he won in the civil suits, rightfully won in the civil suits that of course could not make up for the time that he lost, and he put that into the creation of the Jeffrey Deskovic Foundation for Justice. And that is an organization that works for the exoneration of wrongfully convicted people, wrongfully incarcerated people. And he's also, just to add to that, how many years, halfway through law school?
Yes.
He's currently halfway through law school, getting ready to, when he gets his degree, to go out there and exonerate people on his own. So I think that's something to say. And the same goes for Kenneth Chamberlain Jr. Again, this is a man whose world was turned upside down. His family's world was turned upside down. And again, they could have turned inward. But this case, the only reason that this case of Kenneth Chamberlain Sr. continues to be brought up is because of the tireless efforts of Kenneth Chamberlain Jr. on behalf of his father, and the work that the Westchester Coalition for Police Reform has been doing consistently for these many years. So again, I'm just so truly honored to be up here on this panel with these incredible people, and I hope that you've enjoyed their presentation. We're going to go to Q&A now. I've gotten some questions, through Slido.com up here. I have some other ones that were submitted to me by some of the members of the Criminal Justice Committee in preparation ahead of time. But we do also have a microphone up here, so if there's anybody in the audience that would like to come up and ask a question, you're more than welcome to do so at this point. So if you want to make your way towards, there's a couple of seats there, you can wait until somebody's finished if you want to ask a question. Come on up to the microphone, and that would be great. So as people are making their way, I'm just going to ask a quick question, and this really is, we kind of talked about this, but I'm interested personally, and somebody else submitted this earlier. What is the most common form of prosecutorial misconduct? You want to touch on that?
Yeah, withholding evidence is the most common, followed closely with improper closing arguments.
And another question that came up earlier that I think is also worth knowing is there any other place in the country that has a commission on prosecutorial misconduct? And if there is, how does it function? Is it shown to be useful? Yeah.
There is no other commission on prosecutorial conduct in the nation. However, 2 points. When the Commission on Judicial Conduct was formed 42 years ago, New York was one of the leaders. We were like the third Commission on Judicial Conduct. Just about every state in the union has a Commission on Judicial Conduct. There are movements taking place right now to establish commissions on prosecutorial conduct, modeled after our bill, by the way, in the state of Louisiana, no less, and in the state of Utah.
Great. So we have some people that have come up to the mic. I don't want to make them stand too long. There's also seats there if you want to sit while you're waiting for, the person to take their, to ask their question. Sir, if you would like, you can state your name and then ask your question.
Hello, my name is Rodney Roberts. I'm going to have a statement and a testimony also with my question. As Jeff introduced me, I'm Rodney Roberts. I spent 17 years wrongfully convicted in New Jersey prison for a sexual-related offense that I was exonerated on with DNA evidence. I also have been acquainted with Bill and the professor and Jeff in their pursuit early on in Albany to help with the bill to establish prosecutorial oversight. I'd like to thank them for that opportunity, because through that opportunity, I got bit by the bug to become a more advocate against wrongful conviction. And with that said, my statement is this. In my case, one of the top issues that affected my proof of innocence was that the prosecutor office claimed that they lost the evidence for 9 years. For 9 years, we would request the evidence, maybe even 10 as it went on. We asked for the evidence, they claimed that the files were lost. So we had no way to test the evidence to prove my innocence. Now, 90, maybe I'm not going to embellish that, maybe 60% of all litigation done in my case was done pro se. I had to educate myself in prison, in jurisprudence. I had to teach myself how to do research, how to write law, how to interpret law, in order to keep my case alive long enough for the evidence to be revealed. As a result of that, another key component in my case, we talk about prosecutorial misconduct. Not only are they guilty in large proportion for withholding exculpatory evidence, which is evidence in your behalf. There's only two types of evidence, inculpatory and exculpatory. Inculpatory is evidence that's against you. Exculpatory is evidence that exonerates you. In my particular case, in the predominant cases, they withhold exculpatory evidence, like you said, which is a Brady violation. The Brady violation is a case that was world-renowned, Brady versus Maryland, that gave a criteria that said that when there's evidence that can show the innocence of an individual, the prosecutor has an obligation to turn that evidence over to the defense. In doing that, provide the case, that evidence, to show that it's not about a conviction, seeking a conviction, but about seeking justice. Another key component in my case that show a lot of the prosecutorial misconduct, not only with the withholding of evidence, but the victim in my case came forward. In my particular case and situation, I was put in a squeeze to plead guilty to a crime I didn't commit. How that went was the state and my attorney, my public defender, collaborated along with the judge, formed a trifecta to put me in a bind to convince me that to save my life, I should plead guilty to a crime I didn't commit. I thought I was saving my life. Although at the time, in the process of doing it, I felt so much that I was betraying myself, but I knew I needed to do this in order to regain my freedom in a short period of time to fight this when I got out. The victim, later on, I spoke to an attorney, another public defender, maybe 8 years later, and I said, look, enough of this. And I explained to them the situation. And I told them, listen, I pled guilty to a crime I didn't commit. The attorney said, you know what, I believe you. I'm going to take a chance with you. He went and did his own investigation and found the victim. Showed her my picture. And her statement was, I don't know who that is. I never seen this person day in my life. Now, They told me that when she saw my photo, she started crying uncontrollably, and that it was, I was a positive identification, that I had no choice, and she was waiting out to testify against me. But kind of find out all these years later that she hadn't even known that someone even had got arrested for the offense. So she became a champion for me. She came to court and testified. They asked her, "Do you see the young man standing in front of you, or see the young man or the person who committed the offense?" She said, "No." The prosecutor jumped up and said, "Hey, Mr. Roberts is standing right there." She said, "I never seen this guy a day in my life. I don't know who that is. In fact, why are you holding him? Waste your time with him when you could be pursuing the guy, person who did it, who's running free now, because you got this young man locked up for a crime he didn't commit." So she stayed on that mantra. However, at that time, the prosecutor felt, and the judge, that her testimony wasn't enough. She wasn't credible anymore. She was credible enough to hold me, but then she became uncredible to release me. Now, I'm going to give you this piece, and I'm not going to be long-winded with this. The judge in my case refused to release me. Now, if you find a judge that admit they made a mistake, you found like some mythical creature, like a unicorn, something that don't exist, like a because judges don't admit they make mistakes. So I sat in prison much longer until the appellate division decided that they had enough. In my case, the victim, as a result of her assault, she had a son. Now, I fought vigorously to take a paternity test. Boom. The paternity test proved that I wasn't the father. That, in turn, turned over evidence to the appellate division that said to them, "We have questions about Mr. Roberts' guilt." Now, with Mr. Roberts, when they did that, they assigned me a new judge and a new attorney. When I got a new attorney and a new judge, that's when my case flipped. That's when my case became a whole different picture. Then all of a sudden, 9.5 years later, the evidence that they said they lost suddenly appeared. Suddenly, now I was happy and sad at the same time. Now, I'm going to tell you, one side of me was like, "Oh, I'm mad to hear that," but the other side of me was like, "You know what? I'm about to go home," because I knew that I was innocent. But in the course of things, in the course of the prosecutor standing their ground, characterizing me as this person, holding this authority, this sway over the court. Now, when they say, I do agree with you when you say that the police have the most power because they make the determination. And I have an additional issue with that, because even in certain situations, especially in the inner city where I'm from Newark, New Jersey, and we have an issue in action with the law enforcement. Now, in these particular cases, and I don't know what to tell a youth in this, so this becomes my question. What do I say to you, or a young man, or even young women nowadays, young girl, when the police pulls them over, or attempts to make an arrest or stop? And this particular person is being cooperative, doing everything as instructed, but yet the officer is still not de-escalating, still being aggressive, still being overbearing. But when the police report is wrote, the police report doesn't say that. The police report says that that person was the villain and this officer was the hero, even though that wasn't the case. However, when that report is written and it goes to a prosecutor office, because there's no accountability to keep prosecutors from just moving forward with any particular case, what protocol has been put in place? What is established in place that will prevent a prosecutor from just accepting this police report as the bare truth and not having no particular steps to challenge this and say, well, maybe this didn't happen, because we know grand jury is not it. You can indict a ham sandwich because that's an unfair process because there's no attorney there, just your prosecutor and the jury.
Let's let somebody answer that question. Do you want to take a stab at that, Mr. Bartlett?
You raised some great points. One of the issues that we're dealing with in terms of what do you do when the police or any other witness is not being honest. Look, the prosecutor's in a position of trying to weigh credibility of the evidence. So they're not there. They have to look at what makes sense, what doesn't make sense, which means that it's not enough simply to say because I come in and say you hit me, that means it had to have happened. You got to have an investigation. You have to look at the credibility, try and find out what other information is there. To the degree that we can get people in the community to use video, it's been very helpful.
Yeah.
You can, for instance, in South Carolina, have a video that shows that the person didn't have a weapon. Those are the things that would be beneficial. And again, bills like this are important because it gives the added incentive for the prosecutor to look into the story that's being given by the police. Now, unfortunately, I think that there's probably no one in this room whose credibility is going to be weighed more favorably than a police officer's. None of us, including the mayor. Not one of us. We have police officers who are here. Okay, Officer Hannon, who's here right now. And he can tell you all about what happens if your word goes against other police officers. And I forget who mentioned it. It may have been, I think Bill may have said, look, when you go to your elected officials, let your elected officials know that, we're not relying just on the judges. We're going to determine whether we re-elect you. And if we don't re-elect you, it's going to be because you didn't take steps to make sure that we have people in positions of power to do the right thing.
Go ahead, absolutely. Just 1 second. Jeffrey wanted to respond quickly to that, too.
Okay. Yeah, super quickly. In terms of your question, I think that that's where, body cams, okay, and also cameras on the police cruiser, too, so we have independent evidence as to what actually happens. And by the way, I want to share, that's a two-way street. That makes for better evidence. That prevents false allegations against the police, which is very important. And look, to the extent that there are police officers with us here tonight, let me say this, right? I consider that the police are the first line of defense against the false accusation, against the wrongful conviction, because if they don't arrest the wrong person, the train doesn't pull out the station. And if at any point in time, don't be afraid to question, look back on your work, and if you conclude you've made a mistake, step up and say that. Please, don't just stay quiet. Serve and protect me as well. Serve and protect the defendants. We need you.
Thank you. Okay.
Dr. David Eberly, I'm president of Southern Dutchess NAACP. I've had a lot of experience with the law, both getting arrested, helping register voters in Alabama in the 60s. That was a real fun experience. Getting arrested after I came back from Vietnam in protesting the war in Washington, D.C., and getting arrested other times. But also I've participated both in other incidents in the law and as an expert testimony, and my wife frequently testifies now as an expert testimony, and sometimes I'll just sit and watch the cases. And I'm coming to the conclusion, one, that half the lawyers that go in and try a court case are not really competent. The ones that are competent, we can't afford. You talk about people that are trying their case pro se. That should never happen. Then we go in there, and I watched a case in which, on the first day of trial, the prosecution testified. On the second day, the defense. As soon as the defense finished, the judge says, I'm going to take a 10-minute break. I'll come back with my decision. He came back with a 20-page report, which he read in court. Now, if anybody believes he could go in 10 minutes, write a 20-page report, I'd like to know how. He had that decision written before he ever listened to the defendants. That is crazy. And the last thing, the prison system itself is dehumanizing. And what do? Create a human that's going to turn loose again that's already been dehumanized? Sweden has a much better system. The longest sentence you can get in Sweden is 14 years for anything. They have the lowest recidivism rate in the world. We have one of the highest. I look at this country, and I'm a physician, I look at it several ways. This country is messed up. We have the highest incidence of mental illness, alcoholism, drug addiction, people in prison. Any bad category we want to look at, we're in trouble. And as far as I'm concerned, it seems to be getting worse. If we can't have a system to look at the bad apples, I think most policemen try to do a good job and are good people, but there are some bad apples. But there's no way to remove them. Prison guards have a contract that says they don't have to speak to police if they beat somebody to death, and they can lie and they won't be punished for it. That is crazy. And what disturbs me most is why isn't this auditorium filled with people, because it can affect every single one of us.
Jerry Smith, I'm from the Olsen branch of the NAACP and former president of the branch. Like most of the people in this room, I've encountered judicial misconduct. Again, it was Janine Perot. We had a shooting, and I was at events where she made statements that she knew was not true. I have a statement to make, and I want to ask 3 quick questions. It appears to me, not a lawyer, that most of the stuff that we're deeming to be misconduct is very close to obstruction of justice. Very close to me. If you say that justice is to make sure that somebody gets a fair trial with proper evidence, in a fair way, then whatever we are saying about corrupt district attorneys is corruption of justice, because they are preventing people from getting a fair trial on the fair evidence in the right way. I know once I was talking to a police officer that was making an arrest for a person that was not guilty, and he says to me, "You better leave because I'm going to charge you with obstruction of police procedure." So it's very easy for the courts to say a citizen can be charged with obstruction for even asking a question. And we're not going to put anybody in jail if we ask a question. But it's not so easy to get a prosecutor who has the training, the expertise, and the backing to do the right thing and do things according to the law. My question is this: in creating this commission, what is the possibility of this commission being able to either create a way to prosecute for corruption, for obstruction? I've read cases in Louisiana, in other states, where they've had these commissions and they have taken them and charged them with misconduct, and they only got sanctions. So it's no threat to anybody who's prosecuting people and putting away some time for life of having to suffer, not just from sanction, and a lot of times they'll even tell you what the sanction was for or why. But is this commission going to have any way of trying to charge a district attorney who's deemed to be acting in a bad way, bad behavior, similar to what they would do to the President of the United States? I know Nixon, when he was impeached, had to get somebody to give him a pardon because he may have been charged on a state crime for obstruction of justice. Why are we not sometime talking about trying to create a way for these people not only to be sanctioned and lose their jobs, but to face criminal prosecution like any other American citizen? And how do you do that? That's my question.
Thank you very much. Let's get Bill to answer that question, please.
First of all, right now, we have a crisis of confidence in prosecutors and in DAs. The DA in Rensselaer County is facing criminal charges for obstructing justice, for defying the Attorney General in a civilian shooting by a police officer. We have the Suffolk County DA who's facing indictment, who was forced to resign. And we have a DA we had a DA in St. Lawrence County, Mary Raines, who literally tried to obstruct justice in every possible way in the murder trial of Oral Hillary. By the way, she ran for DA pledging to convict this black man. That was her platform. There are actually signs up when she ran. But back to your question, the commission will indeed have the power to sanction, to suspend, and to recommend removal from office. Under the state constitution, the governor has the ultimate power to remove a DA. Now, in the case of Mary Raines, by the way, the people had no place to go. The county legislature twice asked the governor to first investigate, and then the second time the county legislature in St. Lawrence County voted, they asked her to be removed. Nothing was done. People have no place to go right now. So the point is, the commission has those powers to conduct those investigations. And by the way, it's due process. Nobody's out to destroy a good prosecutor. It's a confidential investigation. The media can hammer down the doors as much as they want and try and get the names of the prosecutors or the assistant prosecutors that are being investigated. It's up to that commission to maintain the highest standards of ethics, not to cave into the media, but to make sure that their investigation is thorough and complete, just as the Commission on Judicial Conduct has done.
To go after, not only is no one out to go after a good prosecutor, you can't. Because if the prosecutor's not engaged in misconduct, you're not going to have this information. You're not going to have all of this evidence against them. You're not going to have an indictment against the prosecutor who's doing the right thing.
All right, first, Andre Rainey, Mayor of Peekskill, New York. I personally want to say thank you to the Peekskill NAACP for bringing this to our city and making us aware. I want to say thank all of you gentlemen for being here this evening, as well as helping out, the getting the message out. Jeffrey, thank you so much for continuing to do what you're doing with your life after what you've experienced, and being a great leader for all of those who's experienced anything similar to what you've done. I just want to make a few clear points. First of all, I do want to say that there's no chicken here, and I stand by that. But on an important note and in a serious message, I want to let you know that there are people put in positions and people put in different places to give your life an even better purpose. And you've experienced seeing people lie, manipulate, and do everything they can to make you look like some type of monster. And you can ask any voter in Peekskill. That's what I like. That's the first thing that I would like to challenge, because I've done it. And I will never have a problem doing it again. Whether I'm here as an elected official or just a citizen of Peekskill, I'm always going to stand by what's right. And to anyone who feels any negativity or any hate, whatever their personal issue is inside, if it's wrong, it's wrong. If it's right, it's right. If it's me with 75 people, if it's me against 75 people, I'll always stand for what's right. And I give you my word on that, and I give anybody and everybody that does or doesn't know me, that's what I stand for. As an elected official, as a mayor, or as a person on this earth, I will always stand for that. If you know you're right, you'll always have my support. Gentlemen, the same for you. I will always stand by what I feel is right, what I know is right, and what I believe is right, and I will always put God first. But I want you to understand that you have somebody that's in an elected position, elected official position, that will support what's right. God bless you.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Mayor.
Good evening. My name is Tiana Gabriel. I'm currently a senior at John Jay College of Criminal Justice in Manhattan. I major in forensic psychology and minor in Africana studies, and I'm looking into law school, so I can't wait. Thank you guys for talking, because it actually just made me more empowered to go finish studying for my LSATs. My question is, as a 22-year-old who is very passionate, who's very eager, who's very educated, and has a passion to sit there and fight for people in situations like you and everyone else, for people who cannot go to law school to be in a higher position of that sort, what would you guys suggest these people do? If they can't go to school, or if they can go to school, they can only get a bachelor's in something, what is something that they can do so that they can feel part of this change?
Yeah, sure. So I'll take the first stab at that. I'm sure other people have some things as well to add. There's a lot of ways to be involved in the struggle other than just being a lawyer. There's both formal, as in a career, or even informally. So super quickly, in terms of as a career, there's investigator, right? There's elected officials have staffers, okay? So there's the policy side, there's work in the nonprofit field that do this type of policy work. A lot of the organizations, they have other needs, whether that's communications, PR, websites, fundraising. So there's a lot of, this issue requires talents that cross the boards. You could have your focus on it, but you do it through one of those mediums in support of entities doing this type of work. On an informal level, educating yourself further, sharing that information with your friends, family, parents, etc., giving voice. A lot of us think that, you have to have a lobbyist, you got to be, this big, rich, wealthy, influential person in order for an elected official to hear you. No, anybody that in that person's district, they'll entertain you, they'll hear what you have to say. So there's that, there's mobilizing, there's grassroots efforts, there's coming to events like this, getting people to come to events like this. I remember, not to get political, but when President Obama ran, all his politics aside, one way or the other, he raised, like, I don't even remember the figure anymore. I used to know it, but with donations of, $5, $10, $20 variety, So, it all adds up. So just even on a donor level, if you work at a company that does matching giving, or they do corporate philanthropy, that's another aspect of things. Certainly there's social media. There's that aspect of it too. So really, the limit is really, and then I'll end now, the limit is just your imagination. If there's a way you can conceptualize how it can help the movement, it can be done. Just places, my entity, Bill's Coalition, which I'm part of, and many other entities, NAACP. Look, there's never a shortage of things to do. So volunteers, okay, that could be another way too. And by the way, I'm an alum of John Jay. I have a master's from there, so I'm glad another John Jay alum is in the house. Okay, wanting to do some change. Yes. And think about running for office one day as well. Look, wouldn't it be nice to actually have your hands on the levers of power to get some things done? Use it for the right thing. That's what I'm so excited about Peekskill for, and the new ticket that was voted in. I really believe some special things are going to happen here. But think about that in the future as well.
I want to mention one thing, to everybody here. This is the 50th anniversary of the assassination of Martin Luther King, of the assassination of Robert Kennedy, and also of a lot of campus unrest. And she's not listening. She's sitting down. But college campuses were responsible for a lot of the critical change in the war against social and economic injustice in the 60s. And I still believe in the 4 C's. College campuses change culture. And for all the students in this room today, it's time to resurrect. It really is. We need more on-campus movements, especially the law students or the people who want to become law students. It could happen to you as interns. We have 2 or 3 or 4 interns every semester, and they walk the halls with us. By the time they're done, after they're in awe and actually somewhat very disappointed at the way Albany works. So get your student governments to mobilize on-campus petitions and share them with your senators and your assemblymen. There are 3 names that everybody in this audience should keep in mind. Senator Klein, Senator Stewart Cousins, and Assemblywoman Shelley Mayer, okay? Because if the Democrats take control, they're going to determine where this commission bill goes. And all of them, each of them has been on the fence on this bill. One day they're here, then the DAs walk in and pull them in the other direction. They're in leadership positions. One is running for the state senate. Shelley Mayer, you need to go out there and you need to ask them why they're not standing up to the DAs. And the governor is holding regional budget meetings the next 3 weeks. He's taking his bandwagon all around the state. You need to show up at those regional budget meetings and stand up and ask them why the commission is not in the budget. That's your opportunity. You got a forum to do that.
Let me just jump in for a second, if I could. Yeah, I also think everything that was said has been terrific, but you need to educate yourselves even more than you are already educated. And here's what I'm talking about. Bill, next to me, started this organization called It Could Happen to You. I would say, from everything I read, his organization, his website, will give you more information about what's going on with prosecutors than any other website, any other place that I can think of in terms of that kind of a resource. For example, they document every single criminal conviction that has been reversed by an appellate court because of prosecutorial misconduct. They've got the list, they keep updating the list, and from the way I see it, there are more cases in New York State reversed because of prosecutorial misconduct than any other state in the nation. I think the number is over 40 for the last 8 or 9 years, or something like that, Bill.
37 over 8 years.
Okay.
But it's increased. That's the important.
I know, and it keeps increasing. And that's something you ought to be focused on, because if you're going to talk about misconduct, look at the cases. Know how many there are, and know the reasons why. Now, Jeff said it's the most prominent reason is hiding evidence. Now, I think prosecutors do hide evidence. The problem is, if it's hidden, you can't find it. We know it's there, but we can't find it, so it may be that a case is not going to be thrown out because of that kind of serious violation. But most of the cases have been thrown out by the appellate courts. Why? Because some prosecutors go crazy when they get into the courtroom, and when they sum up to a jury, they say the kinds of things that Donald Trump would say. You know, if he was summing up to a jury, you can imagine the kind of things he would say. And that's the reason why these cases get thrown out. The vast majority of the cases get thrown out because prosecutors just engage in inflammatory, false, derogatory kinds of remarks. So, key on that. And also, one other point that Bill has documented, I think I suggested it, but documenting the cost of misconduct. How much is it costing you, the taxpayer, to litigate these cases, have to retry these cases, have to settle with convicted people who were innocent, as Jeff is and was? The amount of taxpayer money that goes into those settlements is astronomical. And it keeps getting more and more and more. And, I've been involved in some of these cases. I was an expert in some of these cases. And I got paid as an expert. And the money I got paid is you paid me, because as an expert to testify on behalf of somebody who's wrongfully convicted. So it
also have an additional cost that you don't necessarily see. It's an intergenerational cost, and it may not be on someone who's extraordinary as Jeff is to be able to overcome, all the years you spent in prison, get a master's, go to law school.
Oh, of course.
Okay?
I'm not talking just
but
dollars.
I'm talking about the people who get derailed, and maybe they don't go to jail at all, but you have a conviction for a petty larceny you never did. So now, instead of being able to get that job and support yourself and your family, you can't. So now we all pay to support you
All right, good.
when we could have paid for you to go to college, or you could have paid for yourself to go to college. Your whole family could have been on a different trajectory. Instead, we all now spend time wondering why we're the highest tax state and why aren't these people working? Well, who's going to hire the guy who has a petty larceny if he's trying to work in a bank? It's not going to happen. It's not going to happen at a local five and dime store. So these are the smaller cases we never even talk about, but they have a tremendous impact.
That's a good point, Mayo. We're going to add that to our inventory.
Hello? Yeah, last thing is student groups. Okay, starting student groups. And another thing is, look, bringing an event like this, I mean, Bill Bastick and I, Professor Gershman, and, other partners, the traveling circus, like we go to other campuses, but usually it's a student who floats the idea to one person or another. We need more forums like this. Like Peekskill High School was great to host us tonight, but we need additional schools in other jurisdictions. So that could be another way, concrete way that you can help. I mean, it doesn't have to be years from now. That's something that could get started on tonight or tomorrow. The professor said he wants you to reconsider, he wants you to rethink not going to law school, because I think that we need you too. I think that we need as many people as we can. But we have another question, though.
Yes. Hi, my name is Miriam Pauta. I'm actually, I have like 2 years of experience within like immigration and like personal injury, so I kind of like have a little tiny sense of what you were saying about expert witnesses and all that stuff in settlement cases. And what's interesting is that I feel like I'm in track, like, I'm becoming a public defender and possibly a prosecutor at the same time. Don't ask me why, I just wanted to go with both ways. But
We need more ethical prosecutors, so listen, please, we would welcome you in the prosecutor's position.
So, thank you. So, one of the things that really, like, I'm glad that you touched bases about that, like, the money that's going in for settlement cases and all that stuff. So, I have two questions. So the first one is there anything that that people are doing to, basically stop the, what is it? Because I've been to a DA's office, and I know the pressure for them to close cases, even if it's like, if it's completely wrong. If you're convicting someone like that's completely innocent, it doesn't matter as long as they're finished, they're done with that. But in the long run, that's affecting us, like, the taxpayers, people's lives, and like you said, you brought so many great points that I actually wanted to bring up, like, so is there any, like, reform, like, is there anything else that is going on to, like, basically reform the DA's office to basically say, like, what, it's important to close cases, but to convict real, like, criminals, not just innocent people, just to get that pressure off your back?
Well, we dialogue with DA officers that are willing to dialogue with us, and we have approached in the past different candidates who are running for the office, and we explain about the bill, and we ask them even to insert the bill into the race, distinguish themselves from their opponents, but, so far no one has taken us up on that, but we have tried to do a little bit of that, and to build on your point, how this affects everybody, just coming at it from a different perspective, in a larger sense, wrongful conviction and prosecutorial misconduct, which leads to that, this is, in a larger sense, this is a public safety issue, okay? Here, follow me. Each time the wrong person's convicted, the actual perpetrator is free to strike again. And you know what? That happened to me. That happened right here in Peekskill. The actual perpetrator, Stephen Cunningham, left free while I was doing time for his crime. He killed another person, Patricia Morrison, who was a school teacher and had 2 kids, just 3.5 years later. So in that sense, it's a public safety issue.
Right. Oh.
Let me mention one other thing. When the Commission on Judicial Conduct was formed, you had all these different court jurisdictions in 62 counties operating differently. Okay? What the Commission on Judicial Conduct was able to do was to establish some uniform standards and some best practices. You have the same situation with DAs. You have 62 different jurisdictions, prosecuting jurisdictions. Every DA has his own culture. Every DA operates differently. Every DA handles Brady differently. You can go into Brooklyn And you can go in a file, and as Bennett said, you got to be careful because you don't know what's there and what's not there. But you can go in upstate New York, in Monroe County or in Erie County, and you'll have to issue 4 to 6 to 8 motions for demand, your attorney will. What a commission on prosecutorial conduct can do is to begin to establish some uniform cultures and some uniform standards. Why should you go from one county, from Westchester County, and then go over to Bronx County and be charged with the same thing and be treated differently? Makes no sense. That's not equal justice under law. That's one of the positive things that a commission can do.
I just want to make 2 additional points to level the playing field, so to speak. Many prosecutors' offices have established conviction integrity units. I know that the Westchester office has, Manhattan has, and Brooklyn has exonerated, I think, 15 or 16 persons through these units. Now, you could criticize some of these units. They're in the DA's office, but these conviction integrity units have done, I think, laudatory work in exonerating wrongfully convicted persons in their office. In addition, I think it's fair to say that the Chief Judge of New York, Janet DeFiore, who she's been commented on here, she established a new rule for all judges in the state that when a case starts, the judge in the courtroom is going to tell the prosecutor, if you have Brady information, evidence, you have to disclose it. Whether that's a good rule or not a good rule, whether it'll work or not, I have some problems with it. But if the prosecutor doesn't disclose evidence under this rule, the prosecutor can be held in contempt. So it seems that prosecutors in some places are doing things, maybe they're doing things because that this commission bill scares the hell out of them. Maybe. But still, things are changing. And I think prosecutors are learning that they have to come up to a higher standard than they've done in the past.
I believe that with respect to the this directive from Chief Judge DeFiore, it requires that the Brady material be provided 30 days prior to trial. So for the gentleman who took the plea, who was innocent, he's not getting that Brady material. Brady material, the DAs already know they have an obligation to provide that as soon as they come into possession of it. It's not a game. It's not, can you play chicken with these people and are they ultimately going to cave in? Because chances are they will. And they're the only ones who really have anything to lose right now. So I think that it's good to have a memo. 30 days is less than what's already required in terms of providing that Brady material.
So I know you had another question, but unfortunately, we are completely out of time.
That's fine.
We've actually gone a little bit beyond what we had allotted for tonight. I just want to say a thank you to all of you in the audience who came here and listened to this. I hope that you were moved, that you learned something about the need for a commission on prosecutorial misconduct, and that you will then move forward and take action. I'm, of course, going to plug the Peekskill NAACP for anybody who is here from Peekskill, but anyone who is from anywhere else, there are many organizations, as was mentioned before, that you can get involved in and work on this issue and other issues around criminal justice. So again, thank you so much to our panelists. Thank you again, Mr. Arthur. And have a safe trip home.